Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the weekly Friday meeting of the Montgomery County House Delegation. I'm Mark Foreman, chair of the House Delegation. We appreciate all the members hopping on early this morning to accommodate our first briefers, Montgomery County Public Schools. And we appreciate you all being here. We know it's a difficult time for a host of reasons, COVID and public safety with what happened at Magruder last week. And we know there's a lot of challenges. But frankly, that's why we felt it was really important that we speak to you. There's a lot of questions and concerns, as you know, out in the community, and our constituents don't care if it's the job of Congress, the state legislature, the county council, or the school board. They just want answers and assistance navigating all this, and they want their kids safe, healthy, and educated. So before we turn to MCPS, let me ask Chair Kramer if he has anything he'd like to say at the top here.
Thank you for that, Chair Corman. I'm good to go and look forward to the robust discussion.
Great. Well, let me turn it over to Montgomery County Public Schools. And perhaps the best way to do this is to let Dr. McKnight and President Wolf sort of present first, whatever information they want to provide to us up front. And then we can do Q&A if my colleagues can use the raise hand function. And let me also thank you all for Danielle, who's been terrific about working information back and forth with us on the issues we're going to discuss here and all the bills and policy questions we're all working on together. We appreciate her work. So with that, Dr. McKnight, President Wolf, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, Senator Kramer, Delegate Corman, and members of the Montgomery County Delegation. Thank you for allowing me to come and discuss issues of interest and importance to Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm Brenda Wolf, the President of the Montgomery County Board of Education, and I'm here to speak on behalf of my fellow board members and the students and families of MCPS. We appreciate the consistent relationship the delegation and the school board have maintained because the collaboration, communication is fundamental to continuing to make Montgomery County the best place for children to learn. So before we begin discussing priorities for the next legislative session, I'd like to take a moment to thank each of you for the hard work you accomplished last year, specifically your support around the Maryland Blueprint. Today, I'd like to address three specific topics: the financial impacts of COVID-19, the further funding for public schools, and the blueprint for Maryland's future. Now, the financial impact of COVID-19. The school system has been uniquely impacted by the pandemic. As a result, MCPS would like most school systems across the nation, has continued to see a significant reduction in enrollment. As we learn to adjust our lives and learn to live with the pandemic, we believe that many of these students will return and we will see an increase as we have seen in international admissions this year. Our numbers are recovering and we continue to grow. We ask that you consider revising the requirements and waive maintenance of effort. We are very grateful that you were able to pass such legislation last year and are hopeful that you will continue that support this year. The realities in public school today warrants a pause in legislative activities and proposals that will have a financial impact on school systems. But fiscally and logistically, any new laws, because of having to manage COVID-19, are burdensome and impractical at this time. Please consider the impacts of unfunded mandates. The second topic I wanted to discuss was funding for public schools. Please ensure this year that there are no unfunded mandates. Just like the economy is struggling, so are the school system budgets. Any relief you can offer is greatly appreciated. And please ensure that the gambling proceeds are delivered as promised. Lastly, the blueprint for Maryland's future. I want to thank you for overriding the veto on Maryland's blueprint and allowing the bill to become law so that school systems can continue the hard work of moving our schools continually forward. We support investments in early education, moving the high school, college, and career readiness indicator to the 10th grade, and a robust pathway option for all students. We also support professionalizing and incentivizing the teacher career pathways. However, we ask that you consider the same equitable compensation for all of our school system employees. We recognize the significant contribution that all of our employees make to the school system. Our bus operators, our cafeteria workers, our building service employees, as well as our principals and paraeducators. All of them work together to make our schools successful. Furthermore, we would like to suggest that the legislature consider adding a career pathway for educational employees who are interested in becoming teachers, a sort of grow your own program. As we struggle to hire school bus operators, paraeducators, and other non-teacher employees, this becomes even more important. We must find a way to include all the members of the education team. In conclusion, it is imperative that we preserve our local autonomy over education. We must be allowed the flexibility to create and implement programs and policies that work for MCPS students. And we must maintain the decision-making authority that allows us to best balance education practices, using available resources, appropriate public input, and measures of accountability. And please keep in mind as you do your work, the tremendous burdens the school system is shouldering during this pandemic. We look forward to our continued collaboration through this next legislative session. Thank you. Dr. McKnight.
Good morning, Senator Corman and members of the delegation. I want to thank you for allowing us to come. We were absolutely looking forward to the conversation today. Senator Corman, as you said, many of our stakeholders in our community have questions. They want to have answers to the things that they care about, and every week seems to bring something different. And so I'm really excited that we were able to come today and to be able to talk through some of the recent incidents that we've had in our school system, whether it's related to COVID-19 or the unfortunate incident that happened at Magruder, just so that I can tell you from a boots on the ground perspective, exactly some of the thinking and planning that's happened behind the scenes, and we can engage in any discussions around questions that you may have. So I do want to start by saying, I believe our ongoing relationship with elected officials have become even more critical as things tend to change more quickly than we can even imagine. And so the sharing of information and how often we share that information is going to be really important. At our last delegation meeting, I remember there were some recommendations about us really spending some time to talk about how often and more often we can come together to do that. And I think that's important as different issues come up so that we can engage in questions. We can hear what you're hearing from your constituents, which we know we share many of the same, but what they say to you may be very different from what we're hearing in the school system, or the same. But most importantly, it's an opportunity for us to stay on the same page. Today, I will make a few comments, and my comments will mirror some of what you've already heard from Ms. Wolf. And I'll share my thoughts on a few areas, and I'll start with the first around where we are with some COVID-19 planning. So yes, we have been in a number of different spaces in which we've had to manage COVID-19, and more recently, when we were faced with the circumstance of the Omicron variant, that brought something very different that we were not particularly planning for, but it did in many ways cripple us when it came down to staff shortages. That was what was different about that variant, and every variant brings something, again, very different. But once we recognized what was happening, we moved into action, worked with the Department of Health and Human Services to determine how we were going to address one, COVID spread, because the Omicron was just absolutely more transmissible than any other virus we dealt with. But most importantly, what we recognize is when we're providing services to students, it is important for us to make sure we are doing that in consideration of all of the services we provide for them. The bus driver, their role in getting them to school, the teaching staff, the administration staff, building services, everyone. And so we have come up recently with the process, and I wanted to make sure you understood that that really, quite frankly, is working well. And it does provide a lot of the decision-making in terms of where the schools are with shortages. Yes, we do monitor the staff, absolutely the case rates for COVID-19 beginning, but we've also been monitoring the staff attendance as well as the substitute coverage and where we are with that in every single school, where we are with bus transportation. And we are taking those factors and looking at them centrally and calling and having conversations with schools that get our attention when we recognize we're wondering if you're able to operate under these circumstances based on what we're seeing. What's most powerful in that process is that the school team, and that is a team of staff who come together and talk about, based on the shortages of staff, based on COVID rates, all of these things, are we able to operate and provide services? I bring that process to you because it's been one that we found to be very successful in the school having that conversation when we then first ask the question, how are you doing? Because our data says to us at Central that there are some things that we should be concerned about. Are you able to operate? And those teams coming together and sharing their recommendations about how they have made adjustments there within the school does give them the power back to say either we have enough resources based on what Central is able to provide us to make this work or not. And so that has been working very well because the school is then able to communicate with the community and the parents around, and a parent representative is also a part of parents are a part of that decision-making at the school level. So they can then message to the community exactly what the decision is in terms of them being able to maintain in-person instruction, or if they need to transfer to a 10-day virtual learning format just to be able to bring some stability to the school. Over the last 3 weeks, we started out with having 11 schools that was our first set of schools that needed to move to virtual for 10 days. Last week, we had 16 schools that needed to move to virtual. This week, we announced yesterday for next week, there are only 4. So I bring that to you as some good news because not only are we seeing the case rates in the county start to go down, it's also, we're seeing that in our staffing and other circumstances that we've had to navigate with Omicron. So that is something that we're happy about, and we're looking forward to that continuing. And our planning really does have us at the point where we plan for best case scenarios, worst case scenarios. So I wanted to give you that update. One other update I wanted to give you is we have been able to work on looking at our areas that represent shortages that started out this year as shortages, namely our substitutes. To cite one specific category, we have our short-term certified substitute teachers who are receiving a pay increase of 7%. Now, 7% basically translates into them being paid $150 per day or $21.43 per hour. In addition to that, we're also now paying the substitutes a $40 stipend to cover additional classes beyond the 5 periods that a full-time secondary teacher has. I share that with you because we are continuing to work with our associations to come to those agreements, and we're getting lots of feedback of our teachers, if they have to cover classes, feeling like they're having the appreciation shown to them to do so, as well as having substitutes come and we're enrolling them and onboarding them every day in our system, which is ultimately helping us to be able to support the school environment. So I wanted to give you those updates, particularly in terms of where we are with some things related to COVID-19. We did have a tragedy happen at Magruder High School last Friday, one that rocked us to the core. We have never had that happen in terms of a student being shot inside of a school building, and absolutely tragic. We've seen this since the beginning of the year, but our students have been isolated for a long period of time, and they're coming back, and they've come back into our buildings this year, having a burden, I guess I would say, that really calls for us to continue to even establish more social and emotional supports for them. So we have a team and with many county government agencies, with many private providers, and we have been working on this, but now it's become even more intense over the past week or so, really mapping out what are we going to do that addresses the immediate safety and security measures that should be taken into consideration and adjusted based on the incident and what we learned from last Friday, since we've never had that happen before, and making those adjustments and sharing that out. Secondly, thinking about the more intensive social emotional support that we need to put in place for our students. Again, recognizing that they came back to us at the beginning of this fall, very different in many different ways. And we can understand why, given isolation, a number of circumstances they had to navigate on their own when we were not in school, and they had that structure of support network around them, is impacting them in a great way. So we're doing that. And then third, just really focusing on how we can bring all of these things together to outline in a certified MOU, not just with agencies like the police department, but the Department of Health and Human Services, to solidify exactly what everyone's role is going to be in providing this support so that we can work in unison to do that. So I just wanted to tell you that I do have my Chief of Staff, Jimmy DeAndrea, and Chief of Teaching and Learning in Schools, Rochelle Rubin, if we want to dive into some specifics around that. But of course, we will be sharing that and sharing information at our board, and we'll make sure that information gets to you immediately so that you have that. And then if you have it in advance and want to talk about it in our meetings coming up, we can absolutely do that as well. I do have some notes on Kerwin Commission legislation and just some thoughts about the blueprint, but I can actually hold those and I can stop here and we can take questions. And that's something that we can come back to based on the content that you most readily are wanting to discuss.
Dr. McKnight, President Wolf, thank you. No surprise, there are a lot of questions from my colleagues. I'm going to start with some of my own. And let me just preface this by saying, I understand the community is quite divided on the issues around schools right now, particularly as it relates to COVID-19. I just have to tell you that my assessment is that the communications are not working. They have not been working for 2 years. I mean, it's a very strange situation where I hear from school parents who ask me questions about the schools that I then have to go to Danielle, who always promptly provides answers, and then relay back to them because they're not hearing directly from their school or from MCPS. But specifically, one of the big issues that unfortunately has filled many of our inboxes is this view that MCPS has been sending home masks that are not up to standard. So how are you addressing the parental concerns about the masks that were sent home not being up to standard? How are you communicating to them the actual effectiveness of those masks?
Sure, I will address that. The overall communications piece I want to address and say we've been in a crisis situation for the past 2 years. Our communication structure was one that was built to protect the brand, to be able to communicate what's happening within the school system. And COVID-19 has brought something completely different. We have been very reactive and responsive, but what we know is we have to create an infrastructure to address that crisis that has gone on much longer than any of us could have imagined. So we are in the process of working with trying to secure crisis communications, because that's where we've been for the past 2 years to support our school system and our messaging so that that can be one that suits the needs of our community. In terms of the mask, we have that issue came to us repeatedly early on when the masks were just disseminated, and we recognized there was some information that went out that indicated that the masks were not certified. We went on, put information on the website, sent it out to our families, indicating that our masks are inspected. We shared information about the inspection process and did put in corrected information that would allow the community to understand transparency around who we ordered from, what our vendors are, and what our inspection process is. So we sent that out, put it on our webpage so that that information could be clarified. We can send that to you all if that will help so that you have that information so that you can share it with constituents as well.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Another question. I'm often asked about how the COVID-19 money that the school system has received has been used. Is that something you're able to provide an update on, what the actual uses have been of the various rounds of coronavirus relief funds that have gone to the schools?
Absolutely. So yes, our ESSER funds have been the saving grace in much of this. And I'll point out, we've spent it on a number of different things. And what we can also follow up and send to you is our plan of exactly how we are using our funding, because it lays it out and it lays it out in terms of why and what that funding is being directed to. I'll highlight a few high areas. One, repairing our HVAC systems. We know that that was going to be one of the biggest factors for our parents, and feeling like that was the safety pieces were taken care of so that students would be able to turn to school in person. So HVAC was one area. Also, testing. We've invested a lot, and we have the support from the state who does support our random testing, but we've also had to order our individual testing kits for students. So that's been a big investment. The masks and KN95 masks specifically also have been an investment. While we've also provided masks since the start of the school year, we upgraded the KN95 in December. So those are just some of the investments that have been made around safety specifically. Other investments around teaching and learning, providing tutoring services to our students at a very significant, in a very significant way, meaning providing it to them before school, after school, paying vendors and paying our teachers who also want to do that. That's also been a big investment. Those are just to name a few, but I think what would be most helpful is that we send that to you so that you have that information and you can take a look at it. And then we can talk about more specific areas if you have questions.
Thank you. Two more from me, and I appreciate my colleagues' indulgence, but hopefully I'm covering some of the issues that people have because I've heard about many of these from you all. What is the current status of the opt-out testing approach that you've been corresponding with the state about?
Yes. So the state, I don't know if you saw their response. We had a letter go to our county council about opt-out and asking the state to do that. And essentially they responded saying that it is up to the local government and how they define that, that gives us that privilege to do so. Right now, we are continuing to work with the county council along with our general counsel to talk together. And ultimately, we're probably going to send a memorandum to the county that we then come up with a strategy in terms of how we're going to work with the state. But the bottom line in that is we do not have there are no specifics that says that we have that privilege to be able to test kids because it is still defined unless you're doing a swab, a spit swab, and that's not what we do or not what's been offered to us in terms of testing through the state testing program, then the other testing is still considered an invasive procedure and we have to have parental consent. So we still are not on the same page in terms of what the state is saying. As a matter of fact, we will make sure we follow up with you about all the legalities that we found in that, because that may be helpful to you in terms of getting some advocacy around clarity for us and what we need to do at the local level.
Okay, so there's no timeline actually being able to implement that because you're still fighting out the legalities.
Correct.
Okay, sorry, my last question. You talked about the substitute teacher shortage and thank you for the update on that. How about the bus operators, which is a problem every year? Obviously, has been a particular problem the last month and a half, but.
So actually, I'll say that the bus problem has been an issue this year, and this is the premise of it. For a full year when we were not in person in school, we were not hiring bus drivers. That's what started this issue this year. We were not running routes, students were not in school, and we could not justify hiring more bus drivers during a period of time when students were not coming to school. So with that said, that's why us and every other district around the nation who were not in school have struggled to provide bus drivers in the way that we needed to starting out this year. But we have been working with SEIU. We have shared that we absolutely want to pay our bus drivers because we're one of the few systems in the state that actually have our own fleet. So it is in our interest to make sure that we're at the top paying our bus drivers. So we've presented that as an interest to us. We're still working with them in the process because of course they have a number of other interests as that will then call attention to other positions that need to be looked at that they will need to see are complementary of their pay increase in the same way. So that's where we are there.
Thank you. Delegate Lukey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Dr. McKnight. I actually want to start just by saying thank you for something you did earlier in the month, which I thought was extraordinary in our political times and rare, which is acknowledging the mistakes regarding communication through COVID. And I personally really appreciated that because I can't tell you how many times we have people who come in front of this delegation and all they do is point fingers and try to argue that it's somebody else's fault and don't take ownership over their mistakes. So thank you for that. A couple quick questions. So first of all, the Built to Learn Act, or sorry, I'm confusing my laws. The Safe to Learn Act required that school systems conduct after action reports on major incidents in their schools. And we've had issues with other systems around the state who've resisted doing after action reports around incidents of violence in schools. Is MCPS planning to conduct an after action process following the incident at Magruder?
Yes. Thank you, Delegate Lukey, and for your question. And I do want to say, absolutely. I can't speak for any other school district. It would be negligent of us not to do so. We've never had this happen before. While we've always had plans for it, it's very different when you go through and you experience it, because then there's so much to learn from what your plans may speak to in terms of whether they were appropriate or not. The next day after we, well, even though it was Saturday, the next day, but we had the community meeting to come together and debrief immediately. And we had, I believe, almost 500 people, if I remember the number that I kept seeing go back and forth on Zoom attend. But we not only then pulled the team together, Magruder, as well as all the central office staff who were boots on the ground to debrief it, but then we also pulled together the police department, the sheriff's department, EMT, and along with the school system and the Magruder staff, so that we could have all perspectives there about how everything went. So we absolutely will do an after action report. And I look forward to us coming back and sharing with you what the upgrades and what the changes will be based on what we've learned.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. So second question, you mentioned some of the challenges in securing subs, and I appreciate that the system is committed to increasing sub pay, and I hope the system will commit in the future to increasing it even more, because I mean, subs have been a problem since I was in the classroom, which is 7 years ago now, right? But one of the conversations that I think we've long not had is the idea of permanent substitute teachers. And I know that the system had committed in one of your agreements with MCEA to the establishment of permanent substitute teachers as a pilot program. Can you update us on where that's at?
Yes, I am happy to report that we have a pool of 45 permanent subs. We started to solidify that last month in December. And of course, that takes a little bit longer because, as you alluded to this, Delegate Lukey, we've always had an issue with substitutes. Here's our issue that it's been different since we brought students back to in-person learning in this last spring and this fall. Our substitutes pool is often consisting of retired teachers who have experience, and many of them are older. So they found it to be a risk to be able to come into our schools when, you know, they quite frankly may have suffered or would consider themselves a vulnerable population. That's what was very different about who our substitutes previously were and who we are now. So quite frankly, the pay is just one part of it. The other part is having them feel comfortable coming into the school building. So yeah, we're excited about having the permanent substitute teachers coming in, and we've been onboarding them and training them and utilizing them in a way that will be helpful to our school system, especially since we now have data that says, you know, where are our hotspots in terms of utilizing those substitutes and being able to deploy them centrally. It has become advantageous for us as well. So that's
Great.
Where we are there.
Great. And one last question. So you had recently met with the county council, and one of the suggestions you made to them is that the system is not well positioned to do all of its contact tracing duties internally, and suggested that perhaps the county might assist the system in taking over some of those contact tracing duties. I thought that was a very reasonable request. Frankly, I don't think the system should have borne the brunt of contact tracing since the beginning of the pandemic. But can you tell me where those conversations are at with the county? Has HHS been working with you all to implement that idea?
Yes, thank you. Just to give a little context, the staffing issue, and not that I am trying to own anyone else's problems, because MCPS has enough of our own to work through in managing the pandemic. But when we brought students back to school in the spring and then again this fall, DHHS, they were just giving us our nurses back because those nurses had been deployed around the county for different reasons. And so they too were hiring contact tracers, just not enough because you have 209 schools. I mean, anything that needs to be staffed in Montgomery County is not something that can be always done easily. So what we had to do was take on that burden, unfortunately, because what we know is that our students learn best when they have in-person experiences, especially our youngest learners. And so we, while we did not want to, we at least felt like we needed to be able to communicate with our families and share with them if their kids were in contact with anyone who had COVID-19, because that would then build their confidence in our system to send their students to school. So that's why we took that on. But yes, we've been doing this now for a year, and it is interfering with everything that we need to do in an environment of teaching and learning. And so we have communicated with that. You heard that Department of Health and Human Services has shared that that is something that they're unable to take on independently for themselves. However, recently, I think it was yesterday, and Mr. DeAndrea, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were able to work with them to say we at least are starting out now with 100 contact investigators who we are going to be putting in the school, which I know is going to significantly decrease that burden. Anything additionally there, Mr. DeAndrea?
You, Dr. McKnight. Yes, Department of Health and Human Services has been working with us throughout the entire pandemic, but especially over the past week in response to Dr. McKnight's request. And so we were able to send out a message to principals on Wednesday saying that COVID-19 case investigation will no longer be the primary responsibility of principals and school administrators, and that the 100 case investigators from the Department of Health and Human Services will be taking the lead, obviously with support from school staff.
So we'll keep monitoring that is what I'm saying, because 100 in 209 schools, we'll see how that pans out. But we'll keep you updated. Thank you for
Great.
asking.
Thank you very much. And just, a side comment, Mr. Chairman, the heroic work of the school nurse at Magruder High School last week, I think demonstrates why the county should be prioritizing putting a nurse in every school, but that's, just editorializing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really just want to start by thanking Dr. McKnight and President Wolf for all of your work during this crisis. I think in particular, Dr. McKnight coming in and stepping up during a major time of crisis when the entire nation has been unprepared, and stepping up to lead our largest school district in the state, most diverse school district in the state. I just want to thank you for all that you've been doing and pushing through with a number of challenges. One of the questions and concerns that I've been hearing in my district is just around going back to virtual school. And I know that there's been a downward trend in terms of it being necessary for certain schools to move virtually. Can you talk a little bit about how you've worked with schools, have you worked with the community to help make those decisions, and sort of where the trend is going and considerations around virtual schools, particularly as we're in this Omicron surge?
Absolutely. And I will say, Delegate Wilkins, it's one that we're very proud of. I mean, we've learned a lot. And as you should know about me right now, if we make a mistake, we will own that and we will address it. As we did when we recognized, when we worked with the Department of Health and Human Services, the 5% threshold was not going to be the lever that we needed to use to determine that. But this process in which we involve, again, parent representatives, the leadership of the school, teachers, building services staff, cafeteria staff, school security, all of those to come together and look at their data. And again, the data points are, what are our case transmission rates? What's our staff shortages across the building? How many substitutes do we have that have covered, or central office staff that has been deployed to us to cover? How have our bus routes been impacted? Those are the factors that they're coming together and saying, okay, central office has called us and said, it looks like we're on a slippery slope. What are we going to do? We then go out and meet with them, and then they share with us, yes, this is what the numbers may tell us, but may tell you, but this is what we're doing here on the ground level to address what the numbers say. And either they're going to say one or two things. Based on our deliberations together, we believe that we have this under, we've taken care of this and we have it under control, or we feel like we're not able to provide services to the students. That team then deliberates, talks with us, tell us exactly what the plan is. We then support, and that's how the decision is made. And so after that, then the communication process starts. And so then the school team takes the lead in saying, we've deliberated. Here's the data that we looked at. Here's what our data said to us. Here is what we're not going to be able to provide, which then goes into our decision-making. And so that process has worked very well. Ms. Rubin is here, and she and the Office of Teaching and Learning have worked directly with schools on that. And I will tell you, the process has been one that's taught us that it is the best way to do it, because one, the central office is not directing and telling the school what we need to do, what they should do, when we don't have the whole story. We can look at numbers, but numbers wouldn't translate easily to us what that looks like in the experience that's happening in the school day. And so it's an empowerment opportunity for our schools and for our community to be a part of that conversation and not being dictated about what's going to happen from MCPS. The other thing is it also turned into some advocacy. We've had some schools in this process that we've said, we're really concerned about where your numbers are. And then they come to us and say, no, this is what our numbers are saying, but here's how we've provisioned at the school level. And so we believe that we can keep our school open and not have to go virtual for 10 days because we've put these provisions in place. So then that's where that empowerment comes in. And then we've also put our equity hubs, regional equity hubs in place so that our families who do have difficult circumstances, they need a place for their students to go. The hubs have been able to work with many daycares that have been set up, and our families are able to take advantage of that. So, I mean, it's a process that I will say I'm really proud of, and we've learned a lot from, and one that I hope that we can continue to keep even in the future when it comes down to a decision-making, because in a school system of 209 schools, oftentimes it's not going to be a decision of one size fits all when you have something like the COVID-19 virus that may be impacting some communities very differently from others.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You certainly need our continued support and collaboration. So please let us know how else we can be supportive as we continue to face these various challenges. Thanks again.
Dr. McKnight, do you have a hard stop time-wise?
Is that for me, Senator Corman?
Yeah, Delegate
Okay.
Corman, do you have a time you need to leave us?
I have another meeting at 9:30, so I'm willing to go all the way up to 9:29.
Great. Well, we'll just go till we run out of these questions or 9:29. Delegate Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, thank you all both for joining us this morning. I know we all appreciate your time. And of course, the Durwood community, as we've already discussed, is still reeling from the horrifying events in Magruder. And I know that we're all keeping the victim's family in our thoughts and hoping for a full recovery from the shooting victim, who it sounds like narrowly maybe missed a shot to the head. It sounds like he wrestled the gun at the last moment and avoided possibly being killed. And I talked to parents who actually are very grateful for the response from school personnel there at the school, and from MCPS and from the police department, who all coordinated to ensure the shooting didn't escalate into something much worse. And I also know that folks, as Delegate Lukey mentioned, are especially grateful for the heroic acts of Megan Wilson, the nurse, who ran into the bathroom and provided life-saving first aid, not knowing if there was an active shooter in the building or not. But at the same time, obviously, many parents still have a lot of questions about the response from both the police and from the school system, including some of the messages they received throughout the lockdown. And so I do hope that y'all will continue engaging with them and not, continue having meetings and continue offering them forums to ask those questions as you conduct your own review of the events of the day. But my question is really about something we've already discussed a little bit, which is the social emotional supports that will be available to the Magruder students in particular. One parent told me that her son seemed despondent and really sadly sort of resigned, and told her that he knew that one day there would be eventually a shooting of Magruder, because that school shootings are so common now. He knew that it would just be an eventuality, which is horrifying that our students feel that way about the safety of school systems in America. But my question is, what supports will be available to students? And I think crucially, how will the school system proactively reach out to students who are traumatized, but who are not the ones who are going to actively seek out help on their own? And thank you again.
Oh, thank you for that question. And I'm going to ask Ms. Rubin to step in and give some more details, but I do want to say, we're going to continue to work with the Magruder cluster. This is not something that's going to shift in a day or a week. I mean, they have been impacted by that. Ms. Wolf and I had the opportunity to be there when the students returned on Tuesday. And the desensitizing piece that you're talking about it's very real. I don't know if you all saw the press conference as well, when Chief Jones shared that there were students in the bathroom who saw what happened, and then they reported on social media that someone was shot. So it is crystal clear to us that not only are we going to have to put things in place to aid our students with their continued social and emotional development, from recovering from this tragedy and just recovering from COVID-19 and, quite frankly, life circumstances, but we also are going to dig in and do some really deep work with some partners around bringing them back to understanding how to, on a basic level, just communicate and care for mankind in a way that is different from an environment many of them have grown up in, with social media being a primary way that they communicate, and through text messaging. So Rochelle, if you want to share some thoughts around things that we have been planning to support those at Magruder as well as generally over the system, I'll let you speak to that.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight, and good morning, everyone. So the continued, certainly, impact of COVID-19 and the continuing human health crisis has had an extensive impact on our students, and I would go so far as to say our staff members as well. Specific to Magruder, the very next day, that weekend, we offered Zoom sessions throughout the day, both Saturday and Sunday, for our students to be able to participate and have access to a clinician. to really talk through and process through their feelings. We've continued to do that on Monday, working alongside our agency partners in HHS, Positive Youth Development, a variety of support services, including the therapy dog that was there. And throughout the week, those spaces have been made available throughout the academic day for students to be able to participate in. And we plan to continue that for the foreseeable future. So there's an entire mental health and social emotional plan that has gone into supporting Magruder, one that is well researched and nationally based. As it pertains to our work around all of our schools and the students that are impacted, we do plan to have a student forum next week where our students will have the opportunity to speak about this, and we will have clinicians and others there who are well versed in being able to talk that through. But we're excited to hear and provide that opportunity. As we are building out our social emotional response to this, we really plan to, we have our social emotional learning curriculum and other things that we are doing in the county, but we really are invested in making it a component of the academic day for all of our schools. And so that is the work that we're actively engaged in. So to build on some of the work of our Be Well 365 platform, but really what we're seeing is that it needs to become part of the day based on everything that our students are dealing and facing with.
Great, thank you.
Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. McKnight, it's good to see you. I also just want to echo some of the other comments. Appreciate how responsive both Danielle and Jimmy have been, and you as well, even while some of you were battling COVID yourself. So appreciate having worked in a school system under crisis. I can only imagine what you're dealing with. So just wanted to thank you all for being here and being so responsive when we do have questions. Just wanted to just very quickly say, I think it was a bold experiment that the school system moved towards with the SROs, with taking them out of regular schools. And I would just, offer our support, our encouragement on, whatever we can do to help on the mental health side and thinking creatively about getting more practitioners in. I think that is the course that, having been a teacher who had a pretty negative experience with some SROs, that's my own personal opinion, but I just wanted to share that I think you'll find many of us willing to, to go to the mat over the mental health supports and trying to think creatively about getting more practitioners into the school. I had a couple of questions just specifically about the COVID response that I'm hearing from a lot of the PTA leaders and parents in my district. Delegate Corman mentioned the bus issue. And I know obviously we had a pretty bad situation in one of our schools with North Chevy Chase when the routes just didn't come the day that they came back, but that seems to have at least resolved itself. I guess the one question that I've heard a lot from folks is there a prioritization within MCPS and the bus routes of schools that have really high farms rates? So is there a look at saying we want to make sure that for students who may not have alternative transportation, that's where the bus routes are being prioritized, and in other schools where parents may be able to carpool or sort of find alternatives or where walking is easier, is that prioritization being done on a daily or weekly basis?
Yeah, yes, it is. What was impactful about the bus routes change is that the depots that actually service a lot of our high impact schools were the depots that were really impacted by staff not being able to come. So that would mean, and which is exactly what we did, we would have to pull bus drivers from routes from other parts of the county, which would oftentimes be the opposite end of the county. And so we had to take a lot of that into consideration to be able to serve the students. But yes, absolutely. It was definitely not an easy task, but that's exactly the approach that we took, especially when we recognized that it was those depots that were more impacted than others.
Great. Then the other question is just maybe we can do a follow-up on this, or if you could just elaborate quick. The Test to Stay program, still get a lot of responses from folks that it's not happening in their schools, and that, one example had somebody write me whose son, had one student in their class that was exposed, but they were forced to stay home for 2 weeks, and they couldn't get a test. There was no test to stay. So I feel like I keep getting mixed messages that it's being implemented, but it's only being implemented at certain schools. Can you give me sort of what the update is on the policy to Test to Stay?
Yes, I'll ask Mr. DeAndrea to speak to that as well. I can tell you that Test to Stay was not able to be implemented at every school. We worked with the Department of Health and Human Services, and so they were being, they initially planned it out as mobile and would set it up in schools that reported high case rates. And so that's where it was set up as a priority, but there was not the staffing available to have it set up at all 209 schools, which is unfortunate. So we had to prioritize where it would start with its implementation. Mr. DeAndrea, anything else? Oh, he may not be available. Well, that's the gist of it, but we can.
Okay, I was gonna say, and I can follow up. Yeah, I think his audio's got some issues. And then just the last question, the other point that I keep hearing a lot from folks, and I know it's something that we got some clarification from the state on, and Danielle and I and a group had it back and forth, is the attendance policy that students can be excused if for excused absences if they feel unsafe or uncomfortable coming to school because of COVID if they've got a family member. But in talking to parents and sort of the day-to-day implementation of it, I'm still hearing folks saying that their schools are sort of trying to keep it under wraps, that they don't want it to be publicly available. They don't want families to be taking advantage of it. And I know sometimes the policy from central office can get lost when it trickles down to schools. So it's just, hoping maybe your team could share that with us and just make it abundantly clear to schools that, if a family member does not feel comfortable having their student attend because of COVID, that is an excused absence. That's not something, especially in high school, I heard from a lot of parents that they're worried, students are going to get expelled or, lose an entire year because of a number of unexcused absences. I think it's over 15 is when negative consequences come into effect. So if your team could just share that with us so we have it at the ready, that would be really helpful.
We will do that and reinforce at the implementation level because that is a priority and we've shared that centrally, but Ms. Rubin is here. I'm sure she will make a note to follow up with schools. We put that for families and we want them to be able to utilize it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. McKnight. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo my colleagues' thank you and appreciation, Dr. McKnight and Dr. Wolf and all of you here. Following up briefly on Delegate Solomon's question, for those that do not feel comfortable going in, is there a hybrid option? I understand it's very difficult to implement, but is there a possibility or are there any pilots going on with hybrid options in schools?
So thank you, Delegate Love, for that question. I guess I would say this is what we considered as a hybrid option in terms of giving the family the choice to be able to make the decision that was best for them. When we say hybrid option, I would imagine we're thinking, they can come in person sometimes or come in into a rotation type of way and then participate virtually. We find that very difficult and find it very difficult to keep and manage the engagement that we need to keep connected with the student which is some of the challenges we experienced, quite frankly, last spring when we had our students rotate in on a different schedule. And so because of the challenges we learned from that, we felt like being able to give families the flexibility to decide for a period of time was the best way to go. I think we'll learn from that. We initially put it in place so that students could choose to go utilize those virtual formats from January 18th to January 31st. But yesterday we announced that we were extending that until mid-February. So I wanted to make sure you all knew that as well. So that's been extended. And as we get to the end of that at mid-February, if we recognize there are some other things that we need to consider, we will do that. But it is a challenge sometimes when we provide that flexibility that we end up losing students and we don't get them on virtual, and we don't want that to then start impacting graduation rate and a number of other pieces. So so we will continue, Delegate Love, to look at that and provide flexibility based on what we learn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Shetty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you so much, Dr. McKnight and President Wolf, for joining us this morning to provide really helpful information to the delegation as always. And thank you also for your accountability and your accessibility, both of yourselves as well as your team. We really appreciate that. So I come at this from a couple perspectives because as many of the delegation members here, I am a parent of an MCPS student who is in kindergarten at Rosemary Hills. And despite the challenges that a COVID year has possessed, it's been an overall pretty positive experience. So we're grateful for that for him. So one of the questions I have is related to the substitute teacher shortage. And I know early on in the pandemic, I was made aware that, and I continue to see challenges with expediting or even responding to some of the potential applicants that are being considered to enter the substitute pool. So for example, I've heard from educators who had taken brief sabbaticals. They're trying to come back as substitutes. They've been waiting for months to get calls back. They've submitted all of their application work and yet it all says like pending in the system and nobody's called them back. Nobody has reached back at all. I've heard from others, from educators, that they really would like to see, I guess MCPS had a standard process in place pre-pandemic that if you had not been subbing in the schools for a year, you have to reapply through the whole process. And so that, because last year was virtual, it was, that basically required almost all of the substitutes who had been in the system prior to go through the entire process again, which I'm sure is a huge burden both to the substitutes as well as to the system. So I'm wondering if you all have implemented any reforms to this process to expedite the review of potential candidates to quickly bolster the possible pool of candidates.
Absolutely. I will first begin by saying we reviewed many of those procedures when we recognized that we were facing a substitute shortage this year, and we immediately changed and invited all of our substitutes back who would have been timed out because they had had not worked in 90 days or 6 months. And so that issue we took care of immediately so that we wouldn't have to spend the time to have them reapply and come back into the system. And it was one of the best things that we could have done. Again, when you get into these circumstances, it forces us, and in a good way, to reevaluate many of these policies and processes and procedures that have been in place for good reason before, but really didn't translate to COVID-19. We did get some feedback from others around them wanting to apply to the system and where there were challenges within the process. So we have been working through that. We actually did some changes on our webpage to update information and have a way for those who are applying to be able to know who to contact if there is some lapse in the process. So that was another communications piece that we worked on to help with that front facing of those who are interested, because we do need everyone. We need all hands on deck. And so if there's something not working in the process, we want to know exactly what that is. I'm happy to bring Dr. Nixon back to one of our other meetings, and she can talk even more specifically about some of those changes that have been made in addition to changing the policy of the substitutes who have not worked in 90 days or 6 months to be able to come back. So I'd love to be able to share those particulars with you, but I will have her expertise here.
That is super helpful, and I really appreciate it. And I'm really glad to hear that you all very quickly made that adjustment, because I do think that that is something that was really important to do. What about the candidates who have applied and have not yet heard anything for months? Is there a person that we can direct those types of candidates if they come to us for assistance? Can we?
Absolutely. I'd like for you to have them contact Dr. Helen Nixon. She is the Chief of Human Resources. And again, I'm asking you to contact her to let her know specifically, because then if that calls out yet again a hole in the process that has not already been addressed, she can address that directly, as that is her department.
Okay, and then the last question, thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for going on and on. But my last question is, my understanding is that paraeducators cannot request subs. And so the numbers that we're seeing on some of the data that has been provided publicly, as well as to the delegation, may not totally reflect the strain that some of the schools are under currently. And I know, for example, in my son's class, there are a number of paraeducators that support the main teacher in the classroom. And so that poses like a significant challenge, particularly if students have special needs and the paras are paired with them for that particular purpose. So can you speak a little bit to what is done to ensure that the schools and the teachers are all supported adequately if a paraeducator in particular is unable to attend, perhaps due to COVID or having to stay home because their own child is under virtual learning at another school?
Yes, absolutely. Your question just speaks to how we've taken into consideration some of the specific expertise that some of our substitutes will have, especially in special programs, that's necessary for them to be able to support the students and the teachers. Oftentimes what we have is within those programs or within schools, a body of people who can step in and support. so that we are not depending on a substitute who may not have that area of specificity to be able to provide the needs to the student in the way that is necessary. But that's definitely something, we can go back and talk with the staff about just to get a better understanding of what would be helpful in that space. And now just even talking it through, the staff who we have in the building who normally step in to support, well, I'm sure their responsibility has increased this year, given all of the other circumstances. So thank you for that comment. We can definitely look into that even more with our staff.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight.
Great. Thank you, Delegate Shetty. Unfortunately, colleagues, Dr. McKnight's pretty much out of time and Congressman Sarbanes is waiting. So Rebecca will follow up with Delegate Foley, Queen, Barvan, Crutchfield to get your questions, and we'll send them in writing to Dr. McKnight. I apologize to everybody for the time crunch. Dr. McKnight, President Wolf, Danielle, the rest of the team, thank you for joining us. Colleagues, we're now going to transition to Congressman Sarbanes, who only has about 20 minutes and has been very patiently waiting. But with that, Congressman, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Chairman Corman. Hey, everybody. It's good to be with you. Actually, I appreciated listening into that presentation from Dr. McKnight, President Wolf. As some of you may know, I spent 7 years working with the state superintendent of schools, focusing on a lot of different issues, particularly reaching out to the Baltimore City school system, but worked with all of the jurisdictions. So whenever I hear those kinds of presentations, I get flashbacks. And it was very useful, in fact, to hear about how a lot of the resources that we've been sending from Washington out to the states, which then find their way into local jurisdictions and to school systems, are being used around testing, other measures to improve the broad response to the COVID pandemic and so forth are being used. So thank you for the opportunity to join in and listen to that. I want to thank the delegation for the work you're going to be doing in this session in Annapolis. Very, very important. A lot of it aligned with what we're focused on in Washington, of course. I know you have a lot on your plate. I know that you're wrestling with how to deal with the surplus in terms of long-term commitments versus sort of one-time investments. And there's always politics involved in that conversation. So I know that that will be a tricky thing to navigate as you're moving forward. Obviously, the incident that occurred at Magruder High School has teed up broadly the issue of how we deal with gun safety in this country, and certainly in the state of Maryland. I know you'll be looking at some potential legislation in that space. As we anticipate a decision coming this summer that will further erode the protection, sadly, that we have under Roe v. Wade and what it means to provide reproductive health care services across the country. Maryland has an opportunity in the General Assembly as well to step into that space and fortify how Maryland relates to that very, very important issue. And broadly, what does it mean to have a strong and robust public health system, which is something I've been very focused on in my role as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and Vice Chair of the Health Subcommittee in that broader committee in Congress. Maryland, I think, can be a model for how you deliver healthcare, a public healthcare system, and you design that. But if you look across the country, there's holes in those systems everywhere, and Maryland's no exception. So figuring out a way to broadly upgrade our public health system, particularly as we've been navigating in COVID and anticipating what comes next, is extremely important. I know a number of you are involved on the climate change issue and broadly addressing environmental questions. I thank you for investing your time and energy in that. Obviously, we're trying to do what we can at the national level to address those issues. So broad thank you for the work that you're doing in the General Assembly in this session. We look forward to collaborating where we can. Let me give you a quick update on what's happening in DC, and then I'll open it up for some questions if you have them. On the COVID front, as you know, the Biden administration has already begun to distribute 500 million rapid tests. I think that system is working pretty well. As you know, you go to a website or there's a phone number you can call. Every household is entitled to receive 4 tests through that particular distribution system. In addition, there's another 500 million tests that the Biden administration is ordering up that will follow on that in terms of providing that broadly to the country. They've required that insurance companies cover an additional 8 rapid tests with no cost sharing involved. So we're monitoring that situation to make sure the insurance industry is actually committing to that in a meaningful way. The administration will also be distributing, I think, beginning in early February, 400 million N95 masks. So that's another resource that will be brought to bear. Tests are also going out to schools and to nursing homes on a weekly basis. So we'll continue to keep an eye on the administration's efforts. Obviously, we put a lot of resources behind those things through the American Rescue Plan and previously through the CARES Act. And there'll be some additional investments in that space with respect to Build Back Better if we can get that over the finish line. 2 or 3 things that are looming before us. I do want to, before I get to that, though, mention, since I spent many, many years working in this space, that last week, sadly, the voting rights legislation and democracy reform legislation that Democrats, and it has been sadly just Democrats recently, have been working on in Washington, met defeat on the Senate floor. If you were paying attention to that, you know what happened was we actually got 50 Democratic senators to support the legislation, the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, on substance, but we needed to get the rules changed to address the filibuster. And while we got 48 senators to support that rules change, which is actually incredible because I would say 6-8 weeks ago, none of them would have predicted that they would have gotten 48 of their colleagues to support that. We couldn't get the last 2. And with Republicans standing against this in a unified way, it meant we couldn't get the rules changed, couldn't get that done. That would have addressed broad ballot access across the country, as you know, to fight voter suppression. It would have addressed partisan gerrymandering across the country, the influence that big money has in Washington, the way we make policy there, et cetera. So there's a lot of good things in there, and I'm just mentioning a few of them. A lot of the attention now has to shift back to the states and efforts to push back on some of these things that we're seeing. Maryland, obviously, relative to what's happening in many other places, is in a pretty good place on these issues, particularly ballot access issues. But I'd ask you to just review all that in this session and make sure that, you know, when it comes to mail-in voting, when it comes to early voting, same-day registration, automatic voter registration, all the things that Maryland can be proud of are in place in a meaningful way, because we're going to need states like Maryland, frankly, to be models for the rest of the country as we turn our attention to what can be done at the state level. It doesn't mean we're giving up at the national level. We can't give up because what's coming at us is so insidious right now. But for the moment, and particularly as we anticipate the midterm elections, a lot of the hard work is going to happen at the state level now to address those challenges. The January 6th committee investigating the insurrection continues its work. Obviously, Congressman Raskin, who represents Montgomery County as well, is a member of that committee along with others. And, you know, they're forging ahead, going wherever the evidence leads and encountering a fair amount of resistance from those that they're trying to get information from, and then making referrals to the Justice Department as they uncover things so there can be consideration of prosecution where it's appropriate. So that's what's happening in the kind of democracy space. Build Back Better, as you know, hit a rough patch at the end of last year. The Biden administration, working with leadership in the House and the Senate, is trying to figure out which pieces of that can be pushed forward. There's many important pieces. We'd love to extend the child care tax credit, which makes such a difference for so many families across the country. Obviously, we'd be investing in pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, investing in education. Beyond that, A lot of climate change measures are contained in Build Back Better. We're going to have to see how that evolves, particularly again with some of the opposition that we're getting from certain senators, including one from West Virginia, and whether that gets broken up into discrete pieces and we organize ourselves behind that, or we can again move forward with a broad package remains to be seen. I encourage you to learn as much as you can wearing your hat as members of the General Assembly, but also being connected to the local jurisdiction of Montgomery County about the various opportunities now to invest these infrastructure monies that have rolled out. Obviously, a huge accomplishment on a bipartisan basis on the part of President Biden and leaders in Congress to get these dollars out in ways we haven't seen for decades. $800 million coming into Maryland for highways, $400 million for bridges, $140 million for water infrastructure, $32 million around airport upgrades, et cetera. There is a list of 25 competitive funding streams that local governments can connect to associated with the infrastructure bill that we just passed. And so that alignment is very important. And please don't hesitate to reach out to my office to get more insight into what those opportunities are so we can make sure that we get those in front of local governments. We're continuing to operate under a continuing resolution right now that expires on February 18th, but we got to get the budget passed. We're going to be 5 months into this year's budget. So that's not a great commentary on how we manage affairs in Washington, sadly, but hopefully we can get appropriations bill passed in an omnibus form before February 18th. So at least the budget year that we're in is spoken for, and we can get to work on the next budget year. We are going to be considering the American Competes Act. I'm happy to answer questions about that if you have them. Some more locally associated things, federal employee pay raise that I and others in the sort of tri-state delegation are focused on. And then we are going to be doing a hearing on the troubles that WMATA has been facing recently in the oversight committee that I serve on in the coming weeks, just to get a perspective there. So those are some of the updates from DC. I'll stop. I know we just have a couple of minutes for questions, but love to hear any that you have.
Congressman, thank you. Thank you again for your patience as we worked with
Sure.
MCS. Our first question is Delegate Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Congressman Sarbanes, for being with us today. I just personally want to thank you for mentioning reproductive rights and the challenge we're seeing to Roe versus Wade, and that's what my question is about. On the federal level, one of the pieces of legislation that you have supported, and I thank you for, and you were able to vote out of the House, was the Women's Health Protection Act. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's moving anywhere in the Senate. One of the provisions in that bill allows advanced practice clinicians to provide access to abortion care. And we have a piece of legislation that's being introduced hopefully next week in Maryland called the Abortion Care Access Act that will do exactly the same thing, allow advanced practice clinicians, nurse midwives, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, when they're appropriately trained, to provide access to abortion care. I think that's really important because we've already seen pressure in the state of Maryland on our provider community. 2 out of 3 counties in Maryland have no abortion provider. And we're seeing folks fly here from Texas already. So my question to you is 2-part. Our state bill is going to allow the advanced practice clinicians to provide abortions, and it's also going to decrease financial barriers in private insurance and Medicaid. So my question to you is, hopefully we can count on your support, but really specifically on the Medicaid issue. One of the things we want to do in Maryland is make our Medicaid funding for abortion permanent, precisely because what we have seen in Texas is this growing inequity, and the folks who can fly Southwest to Maryland or do something else to get access to care are doing so, but the folks with limited resources are really suffering the most. So I guess I would like for you to speak to both, the importance of allowing advanced practice clinicians to provide abortion care, and also the importance of making sure Medicaid funding continues to be there for folks in Maryland.
I think those are both critical, and I thank you for the leadership on that. I know that there's this Kelly bill that's going to be fashioned in the General Assembly. I was I was part of the referendum effort back in 91, 92, worked on that campaign actually with Planned Parenthood when Maryland wanted to step up and demonstrate its support for the Roe v. Wade standard. But as you know, Maryland is actually lagging a little bit now in terms of the broad qualification of practitioners that can provide these services. And it's time to upgrade that response. So I thank you for your leadership on it. And certainly we can continue to endorse that approach at the federal level. As you point out, we did pass it in the House. It's going to be difficult under current circumstances to get it law because of the opposition in the Senate. So, but we'll keep pushing on that and in a sense tag teaming with people at the state level. And obviously, when it comes to Medicaid coverage, I thank you for pushing that perspective at the state level. It's one that again, Democrats in the House endorsed addressing the Hyde Amendment for the first time in many, many years. And we're going to continue to press that, what we would view as enlightened perspective on making sure that access to these reproductive health care services broadly available across the country. To everybody who needs it. So I think we just attempt to mutually reinforce each other in this space with leadership at the federal level, and then obviously bringing attention to the efforts here in Maryland. So I hope that you're successful with that. And I was talking with the president of Planned Parenthood of Maryland, I guess it's 2 days ago, about opportunities for us to provide some support for that.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership on the federal level on the same issue.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Delegate Kelly. I don't see any other questions, but while people are thinking about that, I have one on my own, Congressman. I've been trying to find actually the WMATA briefing or hearing you all are doing, and haven't been able to find it on the Government Reform and Oversight Committee website. So if your staff could just send me that information, I would really.
Yep, we'll do that.
Great. I do not see any other questions. Congressman, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We really appreciate you being with us and all the work you're doing. We know it's a battle in Washington, so thank you so much.
Thanks very much. All the best. We'll be in touch. Take care.
Great. Colleagues, as we transition to our sort of normal work, I want to give a birthday shout out to Delegate David Moon. It's his birthday today. And also a reminder that when we're doing voting, you need to be on camera. That's sort of the kind of I would defer to Janelle, I guess, Delegate Wilkins, but that's sort of the rules of the House. You need to be on camera for the voting in a committee like this. With that, our first order of business is a bill hearing. So I will turn it over to Chair Shetty of the Education, Elections, and Housing Committee.
Thank you, Chair Corman. My apologies. I'm trying to pull up my agenda for today so I can get the bill number correct. But today we are hearing a bill a late filed bill brought to us by Delegate Carr, my district mate, relating to updating our school maps to include a community or that specifically affects the community in District 18, Kengar. So I will turn it to Delegate Carr to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues. For the record, Delegate Al Carr here to present MC 26-22 on behalf of the District 18 team. This is a bill that makes a small tweak to the school board election district boundaries that we enacted in December during the special session. Of course, for anyone watching, the school board district boundaries only affect candidates. They don't affect schools or students or voters. Kengar is a neighborhood of about 350 people, historically Black, located in Kensington, and it's adjacent to the town of Kensington. So thanks to the efforts of the town of Kensington, mayor and council, and the citizens of the town of Kensington and of Kengar, they successfully lobbied the county council to have Kengar and the town of Kensington placed into the same county council district. And because of that action, that has creates a disparity between the school board election districts and the county council districts. So this bill would move Kengar from School Board District 4 into School Board District 3. So that does a couple of things. Number one, it will avoid the problem of Kengar being isolated into an island precinct, and that would create logistical and administrative and cost issues for our Board of Elections. So we don't want that. And it also would actually make the school board election districts more closely mimic the high school cluster boundaries, which is one of the goals of the Board of Education in drawing their district lines. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions, and I'd ask for your favorable consideration of this bill.
Thank you, Delegate Carr. Do any of our colleagues have any questions of the delegate bill sponsor? Seeing none, I do not believe we have any other individuals signed up to testify. We were provided info that MCPS would be here this morning to answer any questions of members of the delegation. Do any members have questions? Great, then that concludes the bill hearing of MC 2622 Montgomery County Board of Ed Residence Districts, Kengar Neighborhood. Turning it back to Chair Corman.
Thank you, Chair Shetty. We will now turn to the committee reports. We'll start with Land Use, Transportation, and Public Safety Committee. Delegate Chair Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've got two bills on the agenda today for voting. First is MC 2522, Montgomery County Deer Hunting Sundays. We just heard this, but I will remind you, this bill authorizes the Department of Natural Resources to allow an individual to hunt deer on Sundays between certain hours during deer hunting season. It also authorizes the department to designate one Sunday during deer bow hunting season on which time limits of 30 minutes before sunrise until 10:30 a.m. do not apply. The practices that this is codifying have been in place since 2017, but that will sunset on June 30, 2022. So we need to extend that. There are no amendments. It passed favorably out of committee. With that, I move favorable on MC 2522.
Chair Love moves favorable. Is there a second? Delegate Lutke seconds. Any discussion? Okay, we're going to do this one by a roll call. Jen?
Delegate Severo,
Yes.
Delegate Barbe,
Yes.
Delegate Carr,
Yes.
Delegate Charkoudian,
Yes.
Delegate Crutchfield,
Yes.
Delegate Foley,
Yes.
Delegate Fraser Hidalgo,
Yes.
Delegate Gilchrist,
Yes.
Delegate Kaiser,
Yes.
Delegate Kelly,
Yes.
Delegate Lopez,
Yes.
Delegate Love,
Yes.
Delegate Lutke,
Yes.
Delegate Moon,
No.
Delegate Palakovich Carr,
Yes.
Delegate Chi,
Yes.
Delegate Queen,
Yes.
Delegate Resnick,
Yes.
Delegate Shetty,
Yes.
Delegate Solomon,
Yes.
Delegate Stewart,
Yes.
Delegate Wilkins.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
All right.
The bill obviously passes. And just a reminder, my colleagues, you need to have your camera on to vote, as I said a few minutes ago. Chair Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second bill we have today is PGMC 11122, Washington Suburban Transit Committee, Montgomery County Commissioners Repeal of Term Limit. This bill, there are two amendments. As amended, this bill repeals a prohibition against a WSTC commissioner appointed by the Montgomery County Executive and a commissioner appointed by the Prince George's County Executive from serving more than two consecutive four-year term limits. So it gets rid of the term limits. So with this change, these commissioners no longer have a term limit. Currently, the two members appointed by each county commissioner have a limitation of serving only two consecutive four-year terms. The First Amendment makes technical changes to the short title, purpose paragraph, and function paragraphs. The Second Amendment adds relevant sections of the Montgomery County and Prince George's County codes to provide context, and adds commissioners appointed by the Prince George's County Executive to those commissioners who may serve consecutive terms by providing that only members appointed by the governor are limited to 2 consecutive terms. Basically, the amendments add Prince George's County to the original bill, which was just Montgomery County. Mr. Chair, I move the amendments.
Chair Love moves the amendments. Is there a second?
Second.
Lukey seconds. Discussion. Okay, all in favor of the amendments, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposition? Anyone want to abstain? Great. Chair Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the bill as amended.
Second.
Chair Love moves the bill. Delegate Lukey seconds. Discussion. Delegate Esser, did you have a question? No. Okay. Sorry, I thought I saw your hand. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the bill as amended, please signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody like to be recorded in opposition? Would anybody like to abstain? Delegate Acevedo, do you want to be recorded in opposition?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm in support of this bill. However, I do want to make a vote change, but when you're finished.
Okay, so got it. Thank
On
you.
the previous bill.
Thank you,
not
Delegate
this
Acevedo.
one,
So the bill
previous.
passes as amended. Thank you, Chair Love. I'll now recognize Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure that I did a vote change on the previous bill. I believe it was MC, I was a bit mistaken, MC 2522. I'd like to be recorded in the no. Thank you.
Great. Jen, you got that? Great. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Delegate Acevedo. We will now turn to the Education, Elections, and Housing Committee report. Chair Shetty.
Thank you, Chair Corman. All right, moving to the committee report. Our committee held a really wonderful work session on Tuesday to discuss 2 bills that we report to you today. MC 122, Montgomery County Business Regulation Landlord License, brought to us by Delegate Carr. In the initial iteration of this bill, it created a landlord license requirement and gave tenants the opportunity to allow for any franchise cable provider in the county to come and install or remove cable TV or internet on the property of a person with a landlord license. The bill sponsor worked very hard on amendments offered in the spirit of collaboration with all of the stakeholders that had feedback, very helpful feedback for us. And essentially okay, so Mr. Chair, the first amendment is technical and then the second is the substantive one. Do we want to offer them individually or offer them together?
I think you can offer them together. The technical is to make the necessary changes to cover the substantive and the title and things. So.
Okay, all right, thank you for the clarification on procedure. Offering them together, the First Amendment is technical and the Second Amendment is the substantive one, and what it essentially does is it strikes the bill and it provides for removal of the license requirement, which was, as you recall during the bill hearing, probably one of the more controversial pieces of this piece of legislation. And it makes conforming changes throughout. It moves some of the provisions to the real property article, which then essentially adopts the existing legal definition of tenant, which was also one of the provisions that was of concern to many of the stakeholders. And it also creates an enforcement mechanism to allow for tenants, landlords, and cable companies to be able to bring action in district court if there's any provision of the bill that needs enforcement. So, and provides the county the ability to adopt local laws to enforce. So I would like to move the amendments, please.
Shetty moves the amendments. Is there a second?
Second.
Delegate Blockovich Carr seconds. Any discussion on the amendments? Okay, all in favor of the amendments, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody like to be recorded in opposition? Does anybody need to abstain? Great. The amendments passed. Chair Shetty.
Thank you. I would like to move the bill as amended, please.
Second.
Chair Shetty moves the bill. Delegate Carr seconds. Any discussion on the bill as amended? Okay, I think we'll just do this by roll call just in case there are any lingering questions no one's sharing. Jen?
Delegate Acevero,
Yes.
Delegate Barbe,
Yes.
Delegate Carr,
Yes.
Delegate Charkoudian,
Yes.
Delegate Crutchfield,
Yes.
Delegate Foley, yes, Delegate Fraser Hidalgo,
Yes.
Delegate Gilchrist,
Yes.
Delegate Kaiser,
Yes.
Delegate Kelly,
Yes.
Delegate Lopez,
Yes.
Delegate Love,
Yes.
Delegate Lutke,
Yes.
Delegate Moon,
Yes.
Delegate Palakovich Carr,
Yes.
Delegate Chi,
Thank you for all the amendments. It's a yes.
Delegate Queen,
Yes.
Delegate Resnick,
Yes.
Delegate Shetty,
Yes.
Delegate Solomon,
Yes.
Delegate Stewart,
Yes.
Delegate Wilkins,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Okay, the bill obviously passes. Chair Shetty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving on to the second bill, MC 2422, Montgomery County Board of Ed Data Disaggregation Policy and Racial Disparity Comparisons, offered by Delegate Chi. As you recall, colleagues, this is a bill that Delegate Chi offered to address the MCPS's and the Board of Education's data disaggregation policy to include a separate category for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders specifically. We had a wonderful hearing on this and an equally wonderful work session. Thank you, Delegate Chi, for all of your work on this. We had an amendment offered by Delegate Palakovich Carr that seeks to address the issue at hand while also potentially future-proofing the bill, given the immense amount of growth that we have seen in the county, and specifically where we're seeing the largest percentage of growth in our student body is in those representing 2 or more races, which is currently at 5.3% and growing. So the amendment offered by Delegate Palakovich Carr actually strikes the reference to Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and instead substitutes each racial or ethnic group that constitutes at least 5% of the enrollment of Montgomery County Public Schools. So what that will do in effect is it will enable a disaggregation for Asian Americans, for Pacific Islanders if they have reached the 5% or more enrollment threshold. And then it also then would require the disaggregation now and in the future of any additional groups that hit that threshold. So I would like to move the amendment offered by Delegate Palakovich Carr, which passed our committee unanimously.
Second.
Great. Chair Shetty moves the amendment. Delegate Lutke seconds. Is there any discussion on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Oh,
Aye.
Delegate Kaiser had a
I'm
question.
sorry, Delegate Kaiser. We'll
Yeah, sorry,
move on.
I was a little slow in the hand up. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, and I was pulling up the amendment, which is where I lost a little bit of time there. Given that 5% standard, and I understand why the goal behind that, what then happens to others? Because other will be other Asians, other will be other mixed, other something. So how does that play out in the data when it's provided?
So my understanding is that as when MCPS enrolls students, and as you know, my family went through this process just a few months ago, you are to select, families self-report if they choose which racial and demographic groups that they belong to. There is a category currently for 2 or more races, and then you have the option of picking all of the races or demographic ethnic groups that you identify with. And so MCPS is currently collecting that data as families register, and as I've only done it 1 year, but my understanding from speaking with colleagues who have done it at least one more year than mine is that they require recertification of this information every year. And so as families continue to update their forms and submit it, MCBS is collecting the data, and then they would disaggregate for reporting purposes once families reach that, or once the data level reaches 5%.
I appreciate that background because I'm glad to understand that as well, but that's not exactly what I was asking. I was asking on the later end when they are publishing data and disaggregating. We've now helped that with some of the categories under Asian will now be broken out, but what happens to everyone else? Everyone else is, if they don't reach 5%,
then they're still in the
thrown into other.
Yeah, they're still, I think, in the other category for reporting purposes. And then until they reach 5%, then they will be broken out.
And do you have any sense of what percentage of our student body would fall into other under this amendment?
I don't know. I don't know if Delegate Shi or Delegate Plakovich-Carr knows the answer to that question because of the research they've done.
Looks like Delegate Plakovich-Carr has some input. Delegate.
Yeah, by way of background, so the categories, the racial categories, racial and ethnic categories that MCPS is using actually, I think, are set by federal law, or it's from federal input is basically how they're choosing which the groups are. They are actually disaggregating a lot of this data in many places. I believe for some of the other groups that wouldn't reach this 5% threshold, they are significantly below it, like point something percent. That may change in the future. But I think right now the other groups, for instance, Native American students are, a fraction of 0% at this point.
So if I could follow up, why did you go with the 5% if we're talking about some of the groups being, as you said, point something? Would 3% better accommodate our real diversity, or why was the 5% chosen?
I mean, somewhat arbitrary. I wanted to ensure that the category of 2 or more races was being reflected, since that is, at 5.3% is fairly substantive. There is a fairly large break between that and the next group below it. So, if we went to something lower, like 3%, it actually at this point would not capture any more groups. Even 2% wouldn't capture any more groups.
Thank you, Delegate Plakovich-Carr. That makes sense.
Delegate Lukey.
I just want to add to that. I understand. It makes some sense to me because already with the data disaggregation that happens on the state testing in schools, I believe if the student population in an individual school is below that threshold, then they don't separately report because of statistical irregularities that would happen with the smaller population. So I think there's a statistical argument for it as well.
Thank you, Delegate Lukey. Any other discussion on the amendments? Okay, all in favor of the amendments, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed to the amendments? Does anyone want to abstain? Okay, Delegate Lukey, I assume your hand is just still up from before. Great, Chair Shetty.
Thank you, Chair Corman. I'd like to move the bill as amended, please.
Second.
Chair Shetty moves the bill. Delegate Barve seconds. Is there any discussion on the bill? Okay. All in favor of the bill as amended, please signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Anybody need to abstain? Great, the bill passes. Thank you, Chair Shetty and the committee for the hard work to modify the bill. Colleagues will now turn to the Economic Development Committee report. Chair Chi, before I hand it off to her, I just want to thank her and her whole committee, but particularly Delegate Resnick, as well as the District 20 team that have worked really hard on the piece of legislation they're about to talk to us about. I watched some of the work sessions on double speed, and there was just a lot of activity. So really appreciate everyone's engagement on that. Chair Chi.
Hi, good morning, colleagues, and thank you, Chair Coleman. I actually have to request a special order for this particular MC 822 because even though we passed the bill, there was a little change after that in language as agreed upon by Delegate Resnick and the council in terms of technicality. So our at the advice of the council of our committee, we should have special ordered until our committee has a chance to vote on that change. So I apologize that we won't be able to present today.
Okay, we can special order the bill. My understanding was that the committee had had a chance to look at the language since your meeting, and everyone was, or at least a majority were okay. But if you want a special order, obviously, we'll respect that.
Yes, I would like to special order. Thank you.
Okay, then we will take up this bill next week. We can go to committee announcements. Chair Carp.
Chair Corman, there are no committee meetings for the Metro Washington Area Committee.
Because
We're done with our work.
Right. Extra points for Chair Carr again. Chair Chi.
We most likely, is that the announcement part?
Yes.
Okay. We most likely will have a very quick, maybe like no more than 5 or 10-minute session, either right before our delegation meeting or next Thursday. We will email everyone very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Shetty.
Thank you, Chair Corman. The Education, Elections, and Housing Committee will be having a work session Tuesday at 10 a.m. virtual. You all should have in your inboxes soon, if not already, a link for that. And I would like to add that while we have been crushing all of the bills that have come to us, the only reason we have a work session is because y'all keep filing late files. So we will continue to crush them. Thank you.
Half extra credit for Chair Shetty. Vice Chair Acevero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Land Use, Transportation, and Public Safety Committee will be meeting on Monday at noon for a briefing on MC 1522.
Great. Looks like we have a question from Delegate Kaiser.
I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Chairman, you were giving great kudos to Delegate Carr and his subcommittee, but it's his late files that are throwing off Delegate Shetty's subcommittee. So I just want to point out that's not fair.
Yeah.
He's throwing the results.
Guilty as charged.
All right, I'm going to let District 18 work that out. Anybody else have any announcements? Okay, well, thank you all again for the early start. I know it's not great to have to start at 8:30, but we got a lot of good questions into MCPS and got a lot of work done. And I will see you all next week. Have a great weekend. I think we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.